Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Before I start, I'll let you know we are recording this session, and we'll make the recording and slides available after the event. You can receive 1 CM credit for attending this live event today as well. So thanks for being here. My name is Jenny Koch, and I'm a principal planner with RHI, or Roadside in Harwell, and we're based in the Washington, D.C. metro area. But today I'm here representing the APA Sustainable Communities Division. I'm a volunteer with the division, and we're hosting today's webinar. And this is our second webinar of 2 that we are using to celebrate some of last year's awards for excellence in sustainability winners. Before I get too deep into this, I have to acknowledge our great group of sponsors. So thank you very much to these organizations who help the division put on events like this webinar, our division reception at the annual conference, and all of our other activities. We are, of course, just starting a new year, so if you're interested in becoming a sponsor, please visit our website where you can find more information about the benefits of being an APA SCD sponsor and how you can find out more. If you're interested in volunteering with the division or you have ideas for other webinars or activities, please feel free to reach out. I got a website with a lot of information about not only the awards, but also a lot of other ongoing activities. We'd encourage you to reach out if you're a student, emerging professional, or someone who's been around a long time. Reach out if you're interested in getting involved, and we'd love to have you. So as you know, today we're talking about the awards for excellence in sustainability. And in just a few minutes, you'll hear from some of our some of our speakers representing last year's winners. Before that, though, I want to make sure everyone's aware of this year's awards program. So we'll give a bit of an overview. If you're not familiar with the program, the annual Awards for Excellence in Sustainability is focused on honoring projects, plans, policies, individuals, and organizations whose work is dedicated to supporting and growing sustainable communities. This is actually our 12th annual awards program, and it's always being refined each year. I'll talk a bit about that. But the deadline for this year's awards is in January, next month, January 13th, 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. So you can find out more online. We are using the awards, the web form submission process as last year, where you can save it, you can come back and submit it later. So you do not have to do it all at once, as it has been in some prior years. You can save it as you go. Feel free to come back. This year we have 6 award categories, as you can see listed here. The first 2, State and Regional Award and Community Award, are sort of honoring general planning excellence in sustainability. One at the state and regional level, of course, the larger scale, and then the Community Award will honor a project at a smaller scale. Think a citywide scale, but also could be a small area plan scale or something smaller than, at that scale. The next 3, the Environment, Climate, and Energy Award, the Quality of Life Award, and the Policy, Law, and Tool Award, those 3 categories are sort of topic-based categories. And then the Student Award, of course, honors a student project. And each year, the jury can award up to 1 undergraduate and 1 graduate project, so 2 total in that category. If you go online and look at the information packet, you can find out more about each of these categories. So we hope you'll consider submitting. We do include sort of reminders in our e-bulletin if you subscribe to that. If you're interested in submitting a nomination, that's great. If you think you know of another person or group who might have something they want to submit, please share this with them and help us get the word out about the awards. If you do have any questions about the awards program, you can email me, and my email is at the end of the presentation. I'm happy to help answer questions as needed. But on to the main event. For today, We've got two wonderful sets of speakers, one from the City of Baltimore Climate Action Plan and another set of speakers from the Department of Hawaiian Homeland's General Plan Update. These two groups of speakers are representing two of last year's award winners. Representing the Department of Hawaiian Homeland's General Plan Update, we have two speakers. I'll give short bios for all of our speakers here. Julianne Cachola is a Native Hawaiian planner who works with Native Hawaiian beneficiaries to create Hawaiian homestead communities on the Hawaiian Homelands Trust. Working in the Department of Hawaiian Homelands for the past 22 years, she uses her institutional knowledge to develop new programs and opportunities for Native Hawaiians to return to their ancestral lands. Also speaking about this project is Melissa May. Melissa is a senior planner and resilience practice leader for SSFM International, based in Honolulu, Hawaii. Her areas of specialty include climate adaptation and resilience, long-range community planning, active transportation, and community-based economic development, of course, all of which are key ingredients of thriving, sustainable communities. She's served on as lead consultant for several national APA award-winning projects, including this one. And then our second, or actually the first speaker, the first team you'll hear from is the Baltimore Climate Action Plan, and representing that team is Valerie Rupp. Valerie is a climate and resilience program manager for the City of Baltimore Office of Sustainability, where she provides support for the office's growing climate and resilience portfolio. She has prior experience as a public lands professional and is skilled in partnership building, nonprofit management, communications, planning, and project management. So happy to have all three of you today. Just a short reminder, we'll have a Q&A at the end of the webinar, but please feel free to submit questions as they come using the Q&A tool. We won't answer them throughout, we'll wait to the end, but you can get them out of your head right when they come to you and submit them. So with that, I will stop sharing and I'll pass it over to Valerie.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm, as mentioned, Valerie Rupp with the Department of Planning, Office of Sustainability in Baltimore City. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our recent Climate Action Plan update that was passed earlier this year. And just making sure I can advance my slides. Hang on one moment. Oh, there we go. So just to go over, I'm going to start with a little background about the office and the city itself and some of our climate and resilience and sustainability initiatives, and then the plans the plans themselves around sustainability and resilience, focusing in a bit on our engagement strategies, because that was a big part of this planning process, is to ensure that we were doing all of our work through an equity lens and making sure that we're really enhancing the co-benefits for climate action for the communities in Baltimore. So a little bit around sustainability in Baltimore. I know everyone's from different parts in the country, so just a little background in case you're not really familiar with the city. We are located on the Patapsco River, which is on the Chesapeake, feeds into the Chesapeake Bay. So we are waterfront, and a lot of people think of us as a waterfront city, and we are to a degree, but we're actually on a river. We're actually pretty far off. We're actually the westernmost seaport classically of the East Coast. So that's really where a lot of Baltimore's industry came from and a lot of the legacy that we now deal with in terms of environmental consequences. We are about a little under 600,000 people in the city. The population has been declining since about 1950 census, but there's a lot of, there's a lot of potential and growth happening and a lot of innovation happening in the city. We're about 45 minutes north or so from Washington, D.C., and about an hour and 20 minutes south of Philadelphia. So within the city government, the Office of Sustainability where I work is actually within the Department of Planning. So that is, fairly unique. A lot of when I go to different conferences and so on, I always love to ask people where their Office of Sustainability is housed, and it really runs the gamut of where it might be located. We're located in planning, which we really appreciate because it helps to get sustainability concepts and resiliency concepts within the plans around the city and embedded in those. We do within the Department of Planning, there are three commissions, one of them being the Sustainability Commission, the others being around planning and historic preservation. In Baltimore, the Planning Commission does have a great bit of power because it approves the capital improvement budget. So that does, give a lot of authority to that body. We do within Department of Planning, of course, have other divisions as well. We have a separate food policy and planning division, community planning and revitalization, which is very neighborhood based, our land use and urban design, policy analysis, and then, of course, the historic and architectural preservation. So, all of us working very closely together is really a really great format for us. Our office was founded in 2007. Again, part of Department of Planning. What we do, though, because we're within the Department of Planning, is we are not an implementing agency. So we really do have to work with those other agencies to get these plans implemented and to make sure that they are plans that can be implemented, because we're not the ones that will be really directly interacting with a lot of the implementation of the strategies in the plans. Our work really focuses more on the planning, policy, programs, and permitting. A big chunk of our team is regulatory by nature, and looking at the different floodplains and coastal plains and forestry permits. The city did become LEED Gold certified, so we're very proud of that. We're participating in the city's forward program with EACLY, and of course, we just won the APA Award for Excellence for this plan. What we do, as I mentioned, we do have permitting and reviews within it. We develop plans, doing a lot of outreach, youth engagement, and pilot projects. Again, now that since we're not really an implementing agency, we do a lot of different pilots. Some of those are, being replicated now. We're really proud to say around the country and actually going to other countries as well, like the Community Resilience Hubs program that started here years ago. We also, we work very closely to coordinate with, community partners, interagency, state networks, and of course, international networks and coalitions. Just really quickly, because this does relate very much to climate, this is our floodplain map. So you can see, really where being on the river, we have, but there's a lot of buried rivers underneath the city or buried streams. So this is a big focus of our work is really around flooding the infrastructure, as well as, the buildings and energy that it impacts as well. So just in developing the climate action plan, just want to give a little bit of context and some influences and considerations that we had putting that together. First is that, again, being in a planning office, we have some very robust plans, as I know most cities do. So because of that, there's already, the climate action plan, there was already a great deal of climate action that is folded into our sustainability plan. In fact, a whole chapter is really, a whole section of it, I apologize, is really around climate resilience. So, we're looking, we have that, the, complete streets plan. We have this city's comprehensive plan, which is just about to be approved, hopefully, that has a great deal of influence in that as well. And then watershed implementation plans and solid waste management plans, they all play a great role in the climate action plan from their own unique perspectives. As does I think I might have screwed up the slide a little bit. I might cut out a slide, I apologize, as does our disaster preparedness plan. So because of all of those having so many elements of the climate resilience plan, we really focused our climate action plan on the carbon neutrality goals for the city. So really looking at greenhouse gas emission reduction as the focus for our climate action plan rather than the broader swath, because so much is incorporated into other plans already. So, in line with the Paris Agreement, the city of Baltimore, our mayor, President Scott, had has put forth the goal of net zero by 2045 and 60% reduction of emissions compared to 2007, which is actually the year the Office of Sustainability was created, hitting that goal by 2030. So the most recent cap is really looking at, how we can get to 60% reduction by 2030. The plan is 10 years, so it's a little beyond that, but, really trying to hone in on those strategies. So within Baltimore, within the city context itself, within the state, the highest generator of greenhouse gas emissions is buildings, followed by transportation and waste. That's different than Maryland, the state, which, overall its transportation is actually the highest form of greenhouse gas emissions, but we're looking at specifically what's generated within Baltimore. Another factor with that is, our waste reduction is pretty high because there are some incinerators in the city. Our neighboring jurisdictions have pretty low emissions from waste comparatively because they don't count those emissions because they send them to our city to be incinerated, that trash. So, we do have a higher percentage of that here in the city of Baltimore. And if you look at the graph on the side, you can see, really where the trends have been going since 2007. We have hit a good, we hit 17% reduction, but, we didn't hit the goal of 20%, 25%. So we do have some work, some catching up to do. Looking at this slide, along with the cap, or some of this is some of the analysis that fed that is, if we were in looking at that top line to continue with just doing what we're doing right now, you can see we've decreased a bit, but we'd be projected to be increasing our greenhouse gas emissions by 2045 if we didn't take some very ambitious steps moving forward. So we know that we had to do a lot of work and have some real results from these plans in order to reach that goal. That's a dramatic transition there. So what is our climate action plan? So in 2024, the climate action plan update was a guide for Baltimore to help us meet that goal by 2030, as I mentioned. And there is a link there, and we can certainly share that afterwards. Um, So a little bit of overview in that is our first climate action plan was approved in 2012. So this plan is really the result of lessons learned from that plan. There were some great successes, but again, we weren't hitting our benchmarks. And we've also, really been looking as a city since 2012 to really use equity as a filter for our goals and actions. So, really making sure to incorporate that. We did have robust engagement in the first plan, but a lot of people, we really wanted to increase engagement with this plan and really focus it on frontline communities that are the ones being most affected by climate change. Of course, I've been focusing on co-benefits for that reason, so that we can see, what in addition to the greenhouse gas emission reductions, we prioritized actions that had greenhouse gas emissions and then other benefits along with that, which I'll discuss a little more in some next slides. And we also included a financial analysis and implementation roadmaps. Those being, I'll go over those in a moment, and then, vetting some actions to the model impacts of the greenhouse gas emission reductions for the benefits. So the purpose of this plan that we set forth was, to enhance urban sustainability, improve quality of life, enhance co-benefits, address equity and climate justice, and build healthier city for current residents and future generations. So one thing that we introduced with this plan, which is the first time we've done this in a city, is actually put in some guiding principles that are centered in on climate resilience and equity. And these are principles that we're now, I mentioned we are finishing off our comprehensive plan for the city. That actually these are being adapted for that as well. But we really wanted to get these in here because some of the things that was coming out of the planning process and some things that we experience working in the city is that there's so many dueling priorities throughout the public sphere that, even though people in the city of Baltimore generally really do care about climate change and, see the impact of it, it's not always a top issue for communities. So we wanted to make sure that, again, enhancing those co-benefits, but also starting to ingrain the thought, resilience as a thought process, as something that we can, as a consideration in all the things that we do in the city. So making sure again that creates those co-benefits, but also how we're if we're looking at improving neighborhoods, it's not just protecting the community members, but that environment that they're in. And that, saying that that climate resilience and sustainability is fundamental, recognizing that, and really trying to look at ways that, for instance, we might be able to utilize these principles to make it more important, make sustainability a factor in our procurement processes and things like that. So we were really excited that this part was included in the plan because it does help us to leverage the principles of this in so many different ways within the city. So the process that we took, sorry, these are advancing rather than, there we go. Just to talk a little bit about the process. So leadership for the development of the climate action plan, we had two groups of of two core groups that we worked with. The first being our technical advisory committee. Those were folks that we invited who, are experts in various parts of the plan that we needed, have that expertise. So most of them participated in work time, and they're folks who work for, government or nonprofits. They're researchers or representing, key industries that are playing a role in climate action or, should be playing a role in climate action in the city. We also had another body, our residents advisory committee. That one, we actually, anybody in the city could apply to be a part of that. And we did compensate them for their time and that they participated in this committee. And, they really were there to help us hone our messages and make sure, be our sounding board about, when we're taking these technical ideas, how does this resonate with folks in communities? So, we really, in considering who would be on that, we really made sure to focus in on diversifying that, in terms of, where they live in the city, their age, their income, their race, ethnicity, and other factors, just to make sure that we had a good body, a good representation of the city itself. We did include two youth positions in that advisory committee, and two of our sustainability commissioners also served on that. So that way there was a good liaison between those groups and our sustainability commission that oversees our work. In terms of engagement, we really spent a great deal of time on engagement. It was about 18-month period that was dedicated to public engagement around the climate action plan. It was kind of coming off the tail end of COVID at that time. So there were quite a few virtual meetings. We did hold some in person as well. We did compensate people for participating in those in-person or virtual meetings, and we got the funding from that. City budgets usually don't, at least our city budget usually doesn't provide funds for things like that. So we secured funding through private grants from foundations to be able to compensate people for their participation. And of course, if there was any type of in-person meeting, we made sure to make those as accessible as possible by, making sure we're providing, food, making sure it's convenient to public transit. Also on the flip side that there's parking and, e-chargers nearby, and making sure that there's, different services if people had children or something that they can, bring them and have them entertained while they were participating. We also received some funding to be able to hire several fellows from Johns Hopkins University, which is in Baltimore City. And they put in so much work working with the communities and doing outreach. They attended almost 100 events in the communities with surveys, just pounded the pavement for almost a year to really help get the word out about it, to collect input and promote our meetings and, get people to take surveys to give us input on what their priorities for the plans would be. And our approach to that was always, you go to people, you don't expect them to come to you. You want to make it as convenient and accessible as possible and connect in with ways that they're already engaging. Whether that be, they're having a neighborhood event, we go there and make sure that we're making our presence there part of their community events rather than having our own event saying, come to us. Um, Again, as I mentioned, we really did want to focus on frontline communities. So having those fellows, that extra bandwidth in the office was critical for that because, there's so many small community events. It's really hard with our small team to be able to get out there. So, having several, 4 people dedicated to doing outreach was incredibly helpful with this. We did conduct a public survey and a youth survey. We also added listening sessions when we had the draft plan completed. So that way, especially those nonprofits and other groups who really wanted to give some in-depth feedback, we can hear from them. So we had several of those online. We did have our public meetings as well. Prior to releasing the draft plan for public comments, we made a multilingual toolkit that we distributed to hundreds and hundreds of community associations, city council offices, just any place that nonprofit organizations, any place that we can get information out to communities. And provide in that toolkit, we had everything from social media graphics to newsletter articles and so on, just to make it really easy for those people to drop it into whatever they're communicating to their communities. Um, we also, and one thing I wanted to note too, during any of the meetings, we did have translation services available to anyone upon request. So, whether it was verbal or if it was, ALS or something like that, we would make sure that that was available. And then we use a system that we've been using in the city for public comment called Conveo. It's actually a really easy way to collect public comment because it's just almost looks like a PDF on your computer. You can just drop in comments into it, like just right click and write those in there. So it made it really easy for folks to do that. And it's not like you have to pay for it or sign up or anything. You could just go in and you just have to give an email address that we know who submitted them. So that worked really well for us and people found that easy. However, we did make sure that we would make hard copies available at any time for folks if they'd prefer to comment in that way. And then I mentioned, the co-benefits. So what we looked at as evaluation criteria were a number of things. Of course, looking at the greenhouse gas reduction potential is a key part of that because that's really the primary purpose of this plan. But we also looked at how that factored into different co-benefits that were raised as priorities in our engagement with communities. So public health, economic prosperity, savings to residents and businesses, resilience itself, how we can rebound from those climate change events, social cohesion, how we're bringing people together and how they might help to strengthen communities. City authority to implement, that was a big piece for us because, there's a lot of things that we can't do that are in our hands exclusively. So we wanted to be able to take prioritize actions that we can have more authority over. So we'd be able to, feasibly accomplish them. And then savings to the city of Baltimore, because we do work we're committed to, being there for our taxpayers and making sure we're being good stewards of their funds. So these are I'm sorry, we did, as I mentioned, do financial analysis and roadmaps. What we did with those was we looked at, just took 10 of for each analysis and really looked at, what the financial analysis, what the cost of the city would be. And then also what the next steps would be for each of the plans. And our consultants worked very hard with different agencies to be able to outline how we could make certain specific actions happen moving forward, which is really helpful because so often these plans are things that could theoretically just sit on a shelf when they're done because we don't have funding or action items laid out. So that was something that was really important to this plan. So the results, we ended up, through all this engagement, coming up with some key themes around buildings, energy, and electric, transportation, waste, nature-based solutions, and then the lump all category of other actions. So, really where we looked, like most plans, it's a hefty plan. There's a lot of there's a lot of actions in it, but really looking at how to make houses and other buildings solar ready and more resilient, taking advantage of those incentives that are out there and so on, and looking to decrease the amount of energy our buildings are using, and switching those from fossil fuels to lower zero emission options. It's a result largely, because when we were considering these things, what we heard from folks, where they want to see these changes, but they also have reservations about some of these changes that might, potentially impact renters, for instance. So, one thing in the plan that we talk about is, having landlords, like any buildings when they're being new leases are being put up for sale, that there's some changes made to them to make them more energy efficient, which, in a city where we have a lot of renters, that could potentially impact rent prices that are already really hurting people. So, really making sure that we, hearing that we are able to write into the plan that we're going to prioritize making sure that doesn't happen. So when we're looking at making changes or doing policies and so forth, we can make sure that that's embedded into those actions. Um, and transportation, we really wanted, that's a big piece. And I think that was probably the number one thing people talked about is, really wanting to have more accessible, reliable, and convenient public transit in the city. So, we as a city don't control the public transit, the state does. So, really looking at how we can work with the state to make that happen. And then, of course, looking at more transit-oriented communities, and getting more electric vehicles, charging units out there, but also looking at community car sharing for neighborhood because they are expensive, and there's some options that we might be able to look for, some shared resources along those lines, and electric scooters and things along those lines that aren't all just electric vehicles, electric cars and trucks. And of course, promoting carpooling and van pooling is a big piece in that as well. Waste, we do have a waste incinerator in the city, and we do have our landfills are getting close to capacity. So this is a really pressing one for us. So, in addition to waste diversion being a big part of that in the climate action plan, looking at how we can get more composting out there and curbside composting and moving forward, but also looking at our wastewater facilities, which are generating a good deal of greenhouse gas emissions, and how we can use less energy of those, and reducing the water that we use as well. This one, nature-based solutions, was one that was not initially in the plan, but just it was a high priority for people in Baltimore to see that, it wasn't just we weren't just looking at reduction, but also sequestration. As I mentioned, this plan builds the climate action plan builds on several other plans. So, that a lot of that was captured in there, but we did add that section in to make sure that the community knows out loud and clear that's absolutely a high priority for the city. So, really just looking at how we promote green and natural infrastructure for resiliency and extreme heat, forestry practices for extreme heat mitigation. And also, when we're looking at changing the grids over, that does require a lot of infrastructure work, making sure we're protecting wildlife habitats and bird migratory patterns and so on when that's happening. And then finally, the other one is kind of our catch-all. As I mentioned, a lot of this plan and all of our other plans, a lot of it is really anchored on education and outreach, so that continued engagement with communities to make sure that they know, what resources are out there and so on. And, as a city, we know that there are a lot of residents that might have some wariness in trusting government sometimes. So, really working with community anchors to make sure help deliver those messages as trusted messengers in communities. And then of course just increasing our transparency and reporting, and making sure that people feel comfortable holding us accountable for what we put in these plans. So then implementation really quickly, I know I'm kind of getting close to time probably at this point, but we do have a sustainability and resiliency sub-cabinet. It's a mayoral sub-cabinet that's really designed to be an interagency um, group that helps to progress these plans within the agencies and help them to adopt those practices. So that's a big part of our implementation. We're going to be holding agency and stakeholder meetings regularly to really make sure that we're engaging with those who are really the ones who are, when the rubber hits the road, doing the work on these plans. And of course, I mentioned, some of our ways that we are transparent now are our sustainability report annually and our sustainability commission updates. But we are looking, one of the actions in the plan is actually to have a dashboard or something along those lines that we can improve how we're communicating with the public about our progress. So I know we're going to do questions later on. So with that, I will just turn it over to the next speaker and thank you all very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Valerie. Yeah, we'll pass it over to Melissa and Julianne. And just a reminder, if you have questions for Valerie or for our next set of speakers, you can drop them in at any time. But off to you, Melissa and Julianne.
Thank you. Good afternoon or morning, everyone, depending on where you are. So this is a presentation on the Department of Hawaiian Homeland's General Plan Update, which we did for the State of Hawaii, Department of Hawaiian Homelands. And so today here with us, we have Julian Cachola, who is the senior planner with DHHL, and then myself, who was the consultant project manager. And I just want to acknowledge we had a really great and highly involved investigative committee that included DHHL staff, the chairperson, and several members of the Hawaiian Homes Commission listed here. We also had a couple of sub-consultants that assisted with policy development on the project. So really, these are our learning objectives for today: to help understand the unique position of the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, because it's a really unique situation within the country, and it provides both challenges and opportunities with regard to creating land use frameworks and policy frameworks. We want to help explore the considerations involved in establishing a new land use framework and talk about how it relates to our other existing land use systems in Hawaii. Talk about the interconnections between land use and infrastructure and how we can integrate those into standards. This plan worked to incorporate Indigenous knowledge and perspectives into land use considerations as well. So we'll touch on that, and we'll talk about the importance of trust building and in-depth stakeholder engagement. So I'm going to hand it over to Julie to talk a little bit more about the context of DHHL, and then I will provide an overview of the plan framework, and hand it back to Julie to talk about how we engaged with the Hawaiian Homelands beneficiaries. So Julie, go ahead.
Thank you. So anytime we talk about the Hawaiian Homelands Trust, we have to talk about our prince. So Prince Jonah Kuhio Kalanianaole was the last prince of Hawaii. He was from royal lineage, and he was orphaned, and he was adopted by the king and queen of the Kingdom of Hawaii. He was sent to all the good schools. He went to England, he went to California, and then when he was 22 years old, the Kingdom of Hawaii was illegally overthrown, and he he wasn't going to be taking the throne. So he ran for Congress, and he became our first delegate to Congress. He was non-voting, but he served there until he was there. He had 10 elections that he won. Go ahead. This is what Prince Kuhio was dealing with. The graph on the right-hand side shows the population of Native Hawaiians when Captain Cook found Hawaii. And then the sharp decrease in population due to diseases and, just different lifestyles. And right at 1870, you see at the lowest part of the Native Hawaiian population is when Kuhio was born. And so he is coming out, he is actually living during the worst period of, of, of the condition of his people. And you can see in the picture next door that, they would come to the city thinking of all these new bright lights and everything good, and they would end up in these urban slums. And so he would take out people to help out, and while they were helping these people, they would survey the people. And he concluded after all of this work in the community that in order to rehabilitate the Hawaiian race, that Hawaiians had to be brought back to the land, that they had to be returned to the land. So next. So he endeavored in developing this government-sponsored homesteading program, and he was able to pass the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act in 1921. There he is in that picture on the left in the middle. He was a non-voting member, so he actually had to bring all of these people to Hawaii so that they could learn about Hawaii and Hawaiians. The Hawaiian Homes Commission Act set aside over 200,000 acres of land for homesteading purposes. The Department of Hawaiian Homelands sets up awards residential, pastoral, and agricultural homestead leases. We also do general leases for revenue generating purposes. There is a Hawaiian Homes Commission, which is the policy decision-making board. And other than that, we have pretty much autonomy because the Hawaiian Homes Commission has exclusive authority over Hawaiian homelands. Go ahead. The interesting intersect with Hawaiian homelands is that when Hawaii wanted to become a state of the union, the Admissions Act required that the state of Hawaii include the whole act in the Constitution of the state of Hawaii. So we are embedded in the Constitution itself, and in the Constitution, there's also this article that says there would be a compact between the federal government and the state of Hawaii and the people of Hawaii to basically implement the act. So we are embedded. We have standing that is, at a much higher level than, say, counties. We are in the state constitution, and we're a condition of statehood. Go ahead. The Hawaiian Homelands Trust, as I said, includes over 200,000 acres of land across the state of Hawaii, and we continue to acquire new lands. The key about the Hawaiian Homelands Trust is that it is inalienable. So we can only lease out properties. They felt early on that Hawaiians were too generous, so we didn't understand private property and people were giving away their properties. So this trust actually will be in perpetuity because it has to remain whole. That's a quick overview. Oh, yeah. So we have administrative rules that define a planning system that includes different tiers of of different levels of analysis. So you have at the top level, very high level general plan, 20-year time frame. We have the next tier, which is program plans and island plans, then down geographically to regional plans and development plans for specific homestead areas. And then we have our implementation tools, the funding from the legislature, legislation, and also in our administrative rules. And then our land use authorities. All of that gets evaluated and in a feedback kind of loop. I wanted to mention that in the island plans, so in the general plan, sorry, we set up our land use zones. So we are able to zone our own land. So we come up with our land use zones and define them in the general plan. Melissa will talk about that. And then in the island plans, we apply those zones to every parcel of land, assessing how the parcel should be used. So that is very key in terms of what we do. Go ahead.
Thanks, Julie. So I will give an overview of what's in the plan and how it was developed. So this update of the general plan updated the original 2002 general plan, which was only about 12 pages, just a black and white document that had high-level policies across a range of topics. So our goal for this update was to create a vision-based document with a vision and policies to guide the trust and all DHHL programs, policies, and plans for the next 20 years. There were also some updates to the administrative rule requirements for the plan, and we needed to meet those, which resulted in actually a much larger and more robust document. We also wanted to make sure the plan would be used and really regularly referred to as a policy document by staff, Hawaiian Homes commissioners, and beneficiaries. And then we finally wanted to identify the measures of success so that there would be a way to track progress and implementation. So some of the new things that are within this plan are having a vision and guiding principles, defining and establishing a uniform land use designation framework for DHHL lands. As Julie mentioned, DHHL creates its own land use framework. And what had been happening before then was that each island plan used land use designations, but they weren't necessarily uniform across island plans. There was a lot of overlap, but they weren't necessarily defined consistently, and there were some that were only used as one-offs. So this plan was an opportunity to bring that system into consistency and put some guidelines and standards behind it, including infrastructure level of service criteria and basically guidance on how to apply land use designations. There's also a framework for monitoring and evaluating implementation, and climate change was a big theme because as we'll talk about, the Hawaiian homestead leases are 99 years with an option to extend for another 100 years. So if you have a homestead there, you could potentially be there 200 years, which is a totally different time frame for thinking about climate change. So we wanted to make sure that that was a cross-cutting consideration. So it was a little over a 2-year plan development process. Julie will talk about the beneficiary consultation aspect, but you can see that it kind of spanned the height of COVID as well, which influenced our approach to the engagement and enabled us to use a lot of virtual and in-person techniques. The plan framework is shown here. So we worked with beneficiaries and our committee to establish an overarching shared vision that's kind of the guiding star that is a reference to the traditional Hawaiian navigational system, using the stars to navigate across long distances. And then 10 guiding principles were developed. Some of them have to do with Native Hawaiian values, such as Awamo Kuleana, or carrying your responsibility, Malama Aina, caring for the land, and also thinking about just getting Hawaiians back on the land, providing economic opportunity, housing choice, social and physical well-being, cultural and grounding and education. Legacy and succession was a big one because people want to be able to pass on their homesteads when they pass, and water resources and healthy land. So the 7 topics shown here are the chapters of the plan and how the policies were organized. So land use, healthy communities, infrastructure, natural and cultural resource management, housing, revenue generation, economic development, and food production. And then there was an implementation framework. So the vision included kind of 4 pillars that shown here at left in the icons. So there was healthy land and water that could sustain beneficiary communities that can be self-sufficient, healthy, prosperous, and grounded in cultural knowledge. And then the ohana, so that's beneficiaries and their families that are thriving on the land and engaged in activities that support their self-determination. And then finally, sustainable trust. So as you know, the state and all of Hawaii, as established in the Constitution, are obligated to help support the Hawaiian Homelands Trust. So we've talked about how DHHL's purpose is to enable Native Hawaiians to return to their land, to support their self-sufficiency. And the way that that is done is through the Hawaiian Homes Commission, which has authority to approve all the land use designations separate from county zoning and state land use designations. Hawaii has both county and state land use designations. There are still some health and safety regulations that apply on Hawaiian homelands, but largely they have sovereignty and the ability to regulate land use on their land. And DHHL's role is to determine how best to use the over 200,000 acres of homelands for the betterment of beneficiaries and the trust. And then they're applied through island plans and approved by the commission. And the way that those are applied has been historically based on beneficiary input, analysis of land suitability for different uses, and land use planning best practices. So we aim to formalize that process and provide a little more consistent guidance for that in this land use plan. So in creating this land use framework, which was an exciting opportunity to be able to set a land use framework for all these lands, we went to establish land use designations that could be used across all island plans, identifying what land uses are allowed on each of the designations and how the land can be leased or otherwise have dispositions. We also articulated criteria for how those designations could be applied and what levels of infrastructure should be required. And then we provided guidance for island plans on how to apply land use designations. And the way we did this was really starting with documenting and understanding the needs of Hawaiian Homelands beneficiaries. Julie will explain a little bit more what a beneficiary is and what that criteria is, but really focusing on that population and what their needs are, and then using that to define the vision and guiding principles. And then in turn, identifying a set of land uses that meet those needs and are tied to concrete benefits for that population. And then finally, we categorize them into designations that could be applied from there. So this is an example of how we tied the vision pillars to concrete benefits for Hawaiian Homelands beneficiaries. So under sustainable trust, the land can be used for revenue generation, sustainable energy generation, homesteading. They can be used to provide access to water, protect natural resources and cultural practices. They can facilitate strong communities by putting Hawaiians back on the land and connecting them with safe neighborhoods, care for their ohana, community economic development, a whole host of ways. And then they can empower beneficiaries through providing opportunities for homeownership, affordable housing, growing their own food, and ability to stay and live in Hawaii, which is a really big issue, given that many of our islands, our median home prices are upwards of $1 million, and leaving a legacy for future generations, of course, as well. So what we did next was basically crosswalk all of those benefits. You can see across the top here the 4 pillars of the vision, and then beneath them all those individual benefits that were identified. And we crosswalk those against the potential land use designations, which are shown on the 2 left columns. So we took stock of what land use designations were currently used, and we considered what gaps there were and added some potential new designations. So basically, we tried to make sure that all the designations between all of them, all of these benefits were fulfilled by Hawaiian homelands uses. So this is not the whole table, but it gives you an idea, the exercise we went through. It's kind of our master land use table. Another thing we had to consider was the distinction between homesteading and non-homesteading uses. So homesteads are 99-year leases, as I mentioned, and they're disposed through 99-year homestead leases, and they're typically residential, agriculture, or pastoral homestead awards that are given to beneficiaries that qualify for the trust. Non-homestead uses is developable land that is not considered ideal for homesteads, but can be used for other rehabilitative or revenue-generating uses. So basically, helping the trust generate revenue and also providing other benefits to beneficiaries. And those can be people that can be used by others that are not beneficiaries, potentially through leases, licenses, revocable permits, and rights of entry. So this lists our homestead land uses that we ended up with for the plan, and the first 4 were carried through they had already existed in the DHHL land use system, but we add a little more specificity and criteria to them. And then the 5th one was new, DHHL Kuleana, and that was acknowledging the desire for many beneficiaries to be able to live off-grid lifestyles, be more subsistence-oriented, and just have a closer relationship with the land, and that honored their desire to be on the land. There are over 25,000 people on the Hawaiian Homelands waiting list that are waiting to receive homesteads, and so many of them have been waiting for many years, if not decades. And so having this land use designation also provided a pathway where potentially they could get access to the land sooner without having to wait for all the infrastructure and planning and permitting to be completed in some cases. And then non-homestead land uses are shown here. We had 3 new ones in addition to the existing ones, but we added some guidelines to the existing ones as well. So stewardship was kind of there had been previously a designation that was more of a catch-all called general agriculture, and it had been basically applied to lands that weren't going to be immediately designated or used, but were kind of in a holding pattern. And the community expressed a lot of desire to be able to have access to those lands and to help partner with the department and manage them and just use them for cultural practices. So we changed it to stewardship to more accurately reflect that they're not just lands that are in a holding pattern, but can be actively managed and utilized. Community agriculture was the reflection of the community's desire to be able to have spaces for community gardens, and they weren't necessarily having the same requirements as other community uses in terms of water, land. So we created the new designation, similar with renewable energy, because there's a lot of solar and other projects being sited on Hawaiian homelands. So some of the other key changes were that we created residential sub-districts for single and multifamily. And there are also other types of housing on Hawaiian homelands that are non-homestead uses, such as rentals and kupuna housing. We added that Kuleana land use designation for off the grid. We removed the general agriculture, and under the special district, we suggested creating subzones for climate change and areas impacted by sea level rise, open spaces, cultural resources, and defined associated allowable uses for each of those. And then we also aligned the conservation designation with some of the subzones that exist in Hawaii's state conservation district land use. We did consider adopting mixed use land use designations, but we did not end up using them, and a couple of them are shown here. And part of that was because of the complexities of trying to do homestead and non-homesteading uses together based on the rules of the Act. I think I'm running out of time here, so I'm going to make it quick for the last few slides. So this
Yeah, I
is
think it's
how
fine
we...
if we sorry, we can skip the Q&A. We can take the rest of the time to just go through your slides if that works.
Okay, sure. Thank you. So this is the guidance that we provided in terms of how DHHL could go through the analysis of the lands that they have. You know, they would do a high-level screening to determine whether they were suitable for homesteading or would be better suited to another use. And then they would go through beneficiary consultation to confirm that, and ultimately Hawaiian Homes Commission approval. So infrastructure is a big issue on Hawaiian homelands. Many of the lands are remote and in areas where it's very expensive to extend infrastructure. So we looked a lot at the issues and challenges around that. Wherever possible, DHHL looks to design infrastructure to the county's standards and then have the counties maintain them once they're developed. And so wherever possible for residential, commercial, we just specified designing them to county standards. But in lands that were more remote or more agricultural and rural, we added guidelines that could be more suited to those areas without trying to establish more responsibility for DHHL to maintain infrastructure systems. They do own several water systems and things, but they're not really set up as an infrastructure management agency. So we wanted to try to establish guidelines that would provide flexibility without creating more responsibility like for the department. And so this is what it looks like, our infrastructure level of service for homestead uses. So there's the recommended level of service, and then there's design contingencies if needed, you know, if the conditions don't support that. And this is the infrastructure level service for non-homestead uses. So some other new features were the climate change goals and policies, healthy communities policies, emphasis on stewardship of trust lands. And we also recommended some areas for the department to increase capacity and remove barriers to partnering with organizations to help steward natural and cultural resources. And we also looked at how to improve the pathways to succession, where beneficiaries that pass away can pass on their homestead lease to their successors. And then we established this monitoring and evaluation framework for identifying metrics and data sources that could be tracked, who would be responsible for monitoring them, and how they would be scheduled, the evaluation would occur, how frequently, and how it would be reported and shared back to beneficiaries and the commission. Okay, so I'll hand it back to Julie for the last couple minutes. Thank you.
Right, we'll go through this quickly. So our beneficiaries of the Hawaiian Homelands Trust are basically Native Hawaiian. Oh no, this is my alarm. Native Hawaiian beneficiaries as defined by a 50% or more Hawaiian blood, and their successors. We have existing lessees that are holding residential, agricultural, pastoral leases. We have applicants that are waiting to get on the land. And we have Native Hawaiians that have not even applied for Hawaiian homelands. But all of these Native Hawaiian categories would be considered beneficiaries. So this is our main stakeholder group that we consult with for go ahead on the process. So this is an overview of the consultation process. 10 interviews with staff and 14 virtual meetings. It was a very robust process that Melissa took us through. 8 in-person open houses on 6 islands. You know, we have the challenge of being separated by oceans and have to, that's adds a whole nother level of coordination. We had virtual open houses. We had 4 commission presentations and a lot of those investigative committee meetings, but this is throughout the process. Yeah. Round 1, we had 6 meetings, and this is aimed at looking at our drafting our vision statement. I really liked the Mentimeter participation that could, provide on the spot kind of feedback for who's in the room, and a lot of participation with over, almost 300 people attending the first round. The second round was 4 sets of meetings that did a deeper dive on policy topics for the plan. And we had nearly 400 participants. You can see how in the pie chart, what type of beneficiary was attended those meetings. The process closed out with round 3. It was 8 and this is like coming out of COVID. So we had 8 in-person open houses where beneficiaries could provide input. They're allowed to review the information. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. So the engagement process include different ways of providing input. And it was online, it was in person. I just, Melissa, them coordinated all of these different means, and it was very accessible to our beneficiaries. As you can see, they were looking at policy statements. Each island was provided their own color, so you could really see how different islands were stacking up, and it encouraged them to kind of put their island on the board. We also had these individual sheets that they could fill out and provide direct comments on. This was the actual plan document. What I really like is on the right hand side, in the margin, they quoted actually, they quoted comments that we received from beneficiaries, and it really added in a personal dimension, and you could see a lot of different perspectives represented in those comments, and that were direct quotes from what they submitted. This was our investigative committee that we met how many times? 40 times? No, it was very robust. And we all dug in, really looking at policy issues and discussing land use issues. So that was very deep dive process there. Let's see. Melissa, do you want to take over this ending part?
Sure. Yeah, no, we just wanted to emphasize that having both the virtual and in-person consultation really enabled a broader reach, because there are beneficiaries that are all over the country as well as in the world, and many of them called in and were able to access this because of that. You can see people entered where they were calling from, and it was all over the place. So I think that's our last slide. I appreciate everyone's patience and letting us go over. But I think you'll have access to our email addresses if you want to reach out. So thank you so much. Mahalo.
Yeah, thank you very much to all of our speakers, Melissa, Julian, and Valerie. Here's a quick peek at their emails. Feel free to reach out. I know there's way more information, really valuable information than you could ever fit 20 minutes or even an hour or more. So I appreciate you all coming to talk with us about it. Really interesting. And we'll let you go, but thank you again for attending, and hope you all have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.